and happy Monday to everybody. This week, we're going to continue our devotional series on the Gospel of Mark. And today, I'm doing my devotions in honor of Pastor John. And I'm going to try to honor John in two ways. First, you'll notice that I have my pet, Max the cat, above my left shoulder. John's devotionals often feature his dog over his left shoulder. Of course, the difference is John's dog actually likes to be around John. And my cat only likes to be around me when he needs something, when he's hungry. So it's not as if I was sitting down here and Max was content to come up to my shoulder. I actually had to come find Max and position myself in front of him. But I thought John might appreciate that. The second way I'm going to honor John is I'm going to use an illustration from the 1980s. In fact, the illustration is from Chariots of Fire, which won the Oscar for the Best Picture either in 1979 or 1980. I can't remember. But I imagine that many of you watching this video have seen the story. And the story, Chariots of Fire, features the story of two runners, Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams. Both Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams were exceptional runners. In fact, both of them won gold medals in the 1924 Olympics. There goes Max. But the difference between them was how they approached running and how they felt about their running. Eric Liddell had a relationship with running that was one of gratefulness, one of appreciation, one of joy. There's a scene where Eric is talking to his older sister, and his older sister gives him a lot of grief in the movie for being so passionate about running because Eric Liddell is from a missionary family. And his older sister wants him to give up this emphasis on running so that he can focus on being a Christian missionary as well. But in the course of this conversation, Eric Liddell tells his sister, he says, "But God made me fast. And when I run, I feel his joy." He's expressing that his run is out of appreciation for the gifts that God has given him. It is done out of a desire to glorify God. It is done out of a desire to make God known. Harold Abrahams has the exact opposite relationship with running. Although he's one of the best runners in the world, he hates it. He hates it because his running and his gifts put such a burden on his shoulders. The burden is so heavy and the burden is so strong that it takes all the joy out of it. There's a scene in the movie where he's getting prepped to run a race, and he's talking with a friend about a race, this 100-meter race that he's about to run. And he describes his anticipation of the race in this way. He says, "I have 10 seconds to justify my existence." In other words, he has 10 seconds to run well. And if he wins, his existence will be justified. But if he loses, all is lost. He's lost his identity. He's lost his significance. Do you see the burden? Do you see the weight that running and competition places on Harold Abrahams? It's a very different approach to the same task. And this is something that we're going to see in the first part of our reading today. Today, we're going to begin the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3. And we're going to read the first few verses, which is about a Sabbath controversy. This past Friday, in Pastor Andrew's devotional, that was also a discussion on the Sabbath. And the Sabbath becomes a regular point of tension between Jesus and the religious leaders. And in many ways, it's a tension that is well illustrated between the relationship between Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams. You see, the religious leaders saw Sabbath as a duty. They saw Sabbath as an obligation. They saw Sabbath that if it wasn't done well, then there was a burden, there was guilt, there was shame, there was condemnation. But then there's Jesus' approach, who sees Sabbath as a joy, who sees Sabbath as a gift, who sees Sabbath as an opportunity to glorify God by serving others. So today I encourage you to read Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. And this is where Jesus heals somebody on the Sabbath. And the religious leaders come again and attack him and say, you can't do these things on the Sabbath. And in fact, they get so angry with Jesus that this is when they start to plot to kill him. That's how heavy they felt the burden of Sabbath. Now, we have to give them a little bit of grace. We have to give them grace because their passion for Sabbath in some way was a desire to follow God and his word. And we have to appreciate that because sometimes we can become so fixated that grace is a free gift, and it is, and that there's no way that we can earn salvation, and there's not. But sometimes we can become so fixated on that we become anti-law. The technical theological term is antinomianism. And we act as if God has no standards or expectations for us whatsoever. And that's not true. Think about the Great Commission. The Great Commission is not simply to make disciples of Jesus, but to teach them to obey everything that God commanded. So obedience and following God's law is a part of being a follower of Jesus. That does not go against God's free gift of grace, but it is an expectation for those who would follow him. And we think about the Sabbath in the same way. It is a gift of God. Following Sabbath cannot earn our salvation. Our salvation is a free gift. But God does desire that we live in a certain way to glorify him and to honor him, and because it helps us grow in relationship with him. So I encourage you to read Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 today. I'm actually going to ask you to read a few passages past that as well. I'm going to ask you to read Mark chapter 3, verses 7 through 12. And here's a passage that doesn't immediately have anything. It's just kind of reporting what Jesus did. He goes out into the countryside and he calls his 12 apostles. But I love this summary of the transition that is taking place in this passage. One author says, Jesus again leaves the urban setting for a ministry at the Sea of Galilee, healing the sick and demonstrating authority over all powers. At the same time, we see the second stage of discipleship as Jesus elects and empowers 12 apostles, making them the restored new Israel. There is a transition here because Jesus is not only calling people to follow him, but he's empowering the 12 to minister in his name, to represent him, just as we've been called to minister in the name of Jesus and to represent him. So today, you're going to read a few verses in Mark chapter 3. The first half, thinking about Sabbath and the controversy that it provides because of a legalistic approach to Sabbath versus a gracious, God-honoring approach to Sabbath. And then you're going to read another story about how Jesus continues to minister, but he calls his disciples to continue that ministry and to minister to others in his name. I trust that the Lord will speak to you as you read his word today.